Alright, so today's topic is one that was basically made for me. Magical item changes in Season 7. Before we jump into it, a quick thank you for all the New Year's wishes and Happy New Year to you as well, if I haven't wished it to you yet. And with that, let's go, let's talk about the changes, because there is a lot to work through here, a lot more than I expected, to be honest. It starts off a little bit weird, but we'll talk about it. A new Smite season always brings major changes to items. These changes are intended to bring as many items into viability as possible. Variety in items can also lead to better variety in guards. Since items can affect any guard, their changes are especially exciting and far-reaching. Absolutely true. We know people are excited to see 7.1 item changes like Gladiator Shield sustain nerfs, support aura item buffs, and Hunter crit item buffs. It's kind of weird how they write this. They assume that we already know all this and we're excited for this specifically. I'm like, okay, good to know. So we're getting a Gladiator's Shield nerf, support aura items are going to be buffed, and Hunter crit items are going to be buffed. That's how it should be said. In addition to item changes, there are also more new items and item reworks. Hold your horses on the new items. I'm not entirely sure if they actually mean new items or if a full item rework counts as a new item, because they kind of label it that way later. So we'll see if they're actually new additions to the shop that aren't there in any way yet. Players, again, weirdly worded, have eagerly awaited the Stone of Fall rework. So we're getting a Stone of Fall rework. A new Mage ADC lifesteal item. A new physical power healing bonus item. I guess kind of like the counterpart to Contagion. And of course something assisting Red of Asclepius. And more exciting things we have planned for Season 7. So a lot of information to take away here that is not touched upon in the context of this entire text again, so I want to talk about it quickly. Stone of Fall rework, very interesting because, like I said, worst item that we have very recently in a video. You can check that out if you want. And also Mage ADC item, Mage ADC lifesteal item. Not entirely sure how that's different from the lifesteal items that we already have. Like maybe it's like attack speed and lifesteal, which would be very strong in item. Would be like RC basically. And physical power bonus healing item. First guard that comes to mind here is of course Guan Yu. But then, depending on how expensive it is and how it works, it may also be for gods like Vamana or something. We'll see. Many items will be changing in Season 7 Smite, but we're doing a specific pass on magical power and magical penetration items, and we want to take this opportunity to go into more detail on the reasoning behind these changes and the improvements they will bring to Smite. There are two items the magical changes revolve around. Spear of the Magus. Mages that can easily utilize this item are almost always more viable than the ones that cannot. Very true. If you've seen the SPL games, really the mages at the end were almost exclusively Spear of the Magus users. Though it's not true in any case, but in most cases. This item provides flat penetration in the early game, causing large power spikes. Obsidian Shard. This item has become the new mandatory mage item. Big question mark from here. This item has through time almost always been mandatory, at least on any sort of burst mage or something like that. Sure, exceptions exist that revolve entirely on Spear of the Magus, but there's been very few times where not most mages were at least considering Obsidian Shard in their builds, so not quite sure where that's coming from, but it's used a lot at the moment, so that's okay. Getting this item immediately is the only way for mages to do effective damage to tanks. Well, that's his job, yes. And there's little to no downside to getting it. Well, in most situations, yes. These items create problems for mages as well as other classes. Players have felt the effects of these items in Smite for years. Some players have gotten used to it, but many have continued to feel an imbalance in the magical damage they take. Now, this is true. There's always been this problem of you having to go into physical defense, at least in Conquest, in order to tank, well, any structure. And running a full mage comp, or like 4 mage, 1 physical comp against that is relatively harder to counter and makes it harder to win the game. So that's definitely something that has been in the history of Smite. We feel strongly that it is time to shift things into a healthier direction. Mages. Mages feel forced by Obsidian Shard to be effective. Early game flat penetration creates a wide variance in damage between mages, from player to player or guard to guard. Now, I guess that's true, though at the moment, like the status Doom Orb and Choose of Focus, neither of which actually has pen and you actually get to Spear of the Magus for the pen eventually or Divine Ruin. But hey, by the way, it's worth noting that I think Divine Ruin is not mentioned in this post, which could lead to it staying the same with flat penetration, which would mean it would be a very dominant item in many ways aside of the anti-heal now as well. Non-mages. Easy access to early game flat penetration allows Guardians to deal too high damage. Smite prides itself on allowing tanks to flex into bruiser builds, but current build paths have moved too far in this direction. Mages can buy a single item at the right time, and they can ignore Guardians or Warrior builds and still output consistent damage to them. So, also another point that I think is somewhat like debatable. If we're going the route of tanks being heavy tank focused characters, then the changes that are coming up here will be a little weird because we'll see a lot of penetration items. And yeah, at the end of the day, if you want to make tanks deal less damage, you have to buff their tankiness. And this is happening through the nerfs to some pen items, but then they're offset by other pen items that they're introducing. So I don't really see that fully happening, which is why I think Guardians still need this damage potential to some degree. But I can see that in the current meta that many Guardians are playing very aggressive builds and playstyles, and it's kind of hard to find a middle ground there. To solve these issues, we follow a similar methodology to our Conquest and God ability updates, identifying problems and setting clear goals. Here are the points we decided on when moving forward with this set of changes and the actions we'll be taking to meet those goals. Percent penetration goal. Make receiving magical damage feel less volatile, more predictable, and easier to understand. Actions. Require mages to purchase multiple items to reach the same amount of percent penetration. So this is specifically for percentage penetration and not for flat penetration in this regard here. Flat penetration goal. Decrease early game Guardian damage. Also, make mages more viable and more mage build path viable. Make more mages viable, and more build path. Very understandable, good goals. Actions. Decrease the amount of early flat penetration that is accessible to mages and guardians. Compensate with more power on mage items. Again, as far as I recall, no nerfs to Divine Ruin or changes to Divine Ruin and Spear of Desolation. So the access to early flat penetration should still be very much there, with the changes coming to Spear of the Magus primarily. Magical power goal. Introduce more meaningful trade-offs in itemization. Actions. Adjust item stats to focus on power or penetration, not both. Specific item changes. Let's look deeper into the actual balance changes and redesigns we'll be doing to work towards these goals. Percentage penetration changes. The plan here is to take the percent penetration provided by Obsidian Shard and split it across a group of items, while introducing a hard stat cap for percent magical penetration of 40%. So you can't just stack as much as you want of this. It's a hard cap of 40%, and this is going to be very important with the items that are coming up. This will require mages to buy at least 2 items from this new set of percent penetration items in order to reach the cap and deal more damage to tanks. And keep in mind beforehand, Obsidian Shard alone could basically reach its cap. I think even overreach its cap of 45%. I'm not quite sure what the last iteration was from the top of my head. However, we hope that in this new system that mages will not feel pressured to hit the 40% in every game. With more percent penetration and higher power options, they can build more to their guard synergy or to counter enemy builds instead. And that's where it starts. Obsidian Shard will now provide 20% magical penetration as a stat. New passive, replacing the old one, now providing 10% additional magical penetration on a single damaging ability with an internal cooldown. This bonus can exceed the penetration cap, meaning this can make you go up to 50% penetration. Increased cost, but retains lower amount of magical power. So, in some ways this is an early game buff actually, because in early game when the enemy doesn't have sufficient protection, old Obsidian Shard would only give 15% magical pen and will now give 20%. So that is actually something that's very useful. I'm going to pull up Obsidian Shard on the other side here just to make sure I have on the number side. Yeah, so we have 15% and it goes up to 45% right now. If the target has over 40 magical protections, it starts to scale. So that's a relatively low value where it starts to scale. They actually describe that here. I'm going to read that out real quick. Obsidian Shard will still be a large source of percent penetration, but won't be nearly able to reach its previous max of 45% in a single item. Mages will be able to nearly reach the cap with this item, but with some limitations. Here's some other items we're gaining percent penetration. We'll get to that in a second. So what we have here is kind of the lower end of penetration the item had before. Again, 15 is where it used to start, but you would ramp up from there relatively quickly the moment someone has one magical defense item. So it's a little bit better in early game, but still, if the enemy only has, say, 50% or 50 magical penetration, and this is 10 flat pen, this is not going to be out of this world in terms of flat pen on its own. However, it has the effect of additional pen when using your first ability, which would make it 15 pen for that ability. This means that it will primarily be good on mages that use a high damaging ability right away. So I think, for example, I don't know if Scylla's the best example because she's got built-in pen as well, but let's ignore that for a second here. For Scylla, this would technically not be ideal from the perspective that you want to usually use your 1 before you use your 2, or sometimes before you use your ultimate as well, which would mean that the effect of this extra damage is used up on the 1 and not on the abilities where it matters more, the abilities to deal more damage. And I'm sure there are plenty of examples you can come up with in Mage area where the Mage has some sort of setup ability where you don't want this effect to happen. It's also going to be interesting how this effect interacts with more unique ability interactions. Say, for example, with Radiant's Reiju, if you drop that on an enemy, does it only proc on the initial putting Reiju on the enemy, or does it proc on everything that this ability does afterwards when it's activated? With Zeus, does it proc off everything that you use after putting his 2 on the ground that procs off his 2? Every basic attack, every ability that you drop off that, does it all count towards his 2? Or is it maybe just the AoE effect, or just the first AoE effect? We don't know. We have to see how exactly that works, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of janky interactions that will make it very hard to determine how strong this item will really be. But overall, we can say that it's probably going to be weaker because we will have a lower high-end pen, which is what you usually get this for. You get this to counter the tanks. It will have higher cost and will have a lower amount of magical power. So I'm guessing, looking at right now, it's 2,300 gold and 70 magical power. I have a feeling it's going to end up somewhere like 2,500 gold and maybe 50, 60 magical power-ish, and then the new penetration effect. I don't think they're going to completely destroy it, but I do think that they want you to use the other options, and we'll see why you might want to skip Obsidian Shard anyways when we get to these, which we'll do right now. So, Demonic Grip, the other big pen item, also gets a nerf. Decreased percent magical protection reduction per stack slightly. Now the question is how much is slightly here, because that could be huge or it could be very minor. Slightly doesn't sound like it's going to be that much, which means that basically any AA mage would definitely want to go towards Demonic Grip, because then Demonic Grip would be a very accessible way, not only for pen, but for protection reduction, which is the better stat because it helps everyone on your team. Hard to say, and it always depends on how many basic attacks you can throw out as well. But hey, maybe the craze of Shangqi, basic attack Shangqi, Demonic Grip Shangqi is actually going to be a thing because it's now more effective. I don't know. But we have other items as well. The next one is a bit weird to me because that's Pythagorum's Piece here. I don't know why Shaman's ring is highlighted like that. I don't have my search up. Well, whatever. So Pythagorum's Piece loses its 10% cooldown reduction and gets 10% magical penetration. This is probably the weirdest one of the bunch to me personally, because Pythagorum's Piece was this utility item that you could also build on supports or on solo laners especially, because it has this like mix of tanky stats, damage stats, utility stats. And with this being changed into 10% penetration, I don't really know why any, well, solo laner would consider picking up. But at the same time, maybe they would, because you have you have that early defense going out against you, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna get some pen against it right away, but then is 10% enough? I don't know. Very strange. I feel like it's actually gonna push Pythax out of the meta more than anything, because it's just an odd mix. But we'll see. I'll have to see that particular one in action, because I find it very strange. The next one is Typhoons Fang. Decreased magical power, added 10% magical penetration. Now this one is interesting because it is a high power item, so it's kind of strange that the power would be what's targeted, but adding the penetration means it should work better against tanks anyways. And this should open up like a lifesteal pen path against tanks that doesn't rely as heavily on Obsidian Shard. And they also mentioned that there is going to be a new lifesteal mage item, which would mean that that might synergize with Typhoons Fang. And you would just have like an ADC demonic grip Typhoons Fang build maybe or something. Can't entirely say how it's gonna go, but it might make Typhoons Fang more interesting as an option. And right now it's not being built all that much by most characters. So I think overall it's a good change. And we'll see. Maybe it's something for Anubis, but he's got other ways of pen anyways, and we'll get to that also. Soul Reaver. Increased cost, decreased magical power, added 10% magical penetration. Very interesting item. I think this is going to be the one to mostly look at, because Soul Reaver is already an anti-tank item in its essence. And sure, it has less power then, but that doesn't really matter as much, because you rely more on the passive anyways and on the penetration now then, which would make this a very effective item. It's always a bit of a problem with Ethereal being such a strong item overall that I don't really know how that's going to fit together, so to speak, because Ethereal just does a lot of that health damage with relatively low cooldown. So yeah, I don't know, may need some tweaks to kind of bring Soul Reaver in more, but I think this is definitely an interesting approach to do so. Shaman's Ring being reworked in a completely new item. That's, a mentioned new item. It's just an old item that's being changed. Added 20% magical penetration. So first of all, I know some of you are going to complain and be like, oh, but Shaman's Ring is so great, I build it all the time. I have made a video that specifically discusses Shaman's Ring versus Spear of Desolation in depth, because they technically have almost the same stats if you look at it from a different angle, only that Spear of Desolation almost always comes out on top and doesn't have to be stacked. And therefore, Shaman's Ring being changed is not an issue. It's not something that is misled. It's just that a lot of people simply like Shaman's Ring and feel like it's a good item. It's just really more of an emotional connection than anything. I think even some pro players at some point build it without having built Spear of Desolation. Shaman's Ring really wasn't that good in any situations on paper and when it was applied, because the first tick didn't do any extra effect. It was only afterwards, and you had to stack it first, and it still ended up being less effective in most situations, with some very specific outliers, and it didn't even work as well on dot guards as it should have. So really, it being reworked is a good thing. I know I'm not going to upset some people by saying this. I'm sorry, but there's really no reason for Shaman's Ring to be in its current state unless you just want to build both Spear of Desolation and Shaman's Ring, yes. But that alone, I think, doesn't justify the existence of an item when it kind of does almost the same thing. So what could be is that this could become the new lifesteal item that was mentioned. And if that happens, we're going to have a very interesting combination, because then we have Shaman's Ring, 20% magical pen, and Typhoons Fang, 10% magical pen. And, double lifesteal combo. But we don't know if that's going to happen, or if Shaman's Ring is coming something completely different. We'll see. But definitely going to be interesting to see that development overall. And now we have another very strange one. Warlocks Staff. Added 10% magical penetration. Reduced base health from 200 to 150. Passive stack number, health, power, mana, bonuses adjusted. Now this would be better to know if we had a full picture here. If we could actually see what is adjusted, what is better, what is worse, where is our damage, our power, everything going to. We unfortunately do not have that. We just know that it's going to lose a little bit of health, and it gets the penetration. And with Warlock Staff right now not being built, it could be interesting. If it's easier to stack, if it's lower stacks, it could be an effective choice, really, for any sort of, bruiser-ish mage to get some pen in the build as well, as long as it feels viable to stack it and doesn't feel like it makes you fall behind heavily to do that. And from it, what it looks like right now, with the map change that we've seen so far, early aggression is maybe necessary around mid, depending on how invade heavy you can go on this new mid camps. But outside of that, we will have a lot more wars and a lot more passive early games. The support's being pushed more towards duo if Hyrule Plan works out, which would mean that an item like Warlocks Staff also would have more room to be built, which would definitely be interesting. Then we have Staff of Merlin. Added 10% magical penetration and decreased the magical power. Again, a bit of a weird one. This is going to have cool interaction and magical penetration now, which is interesting. But Staff of Merlin is already in a bit of a weird place, so I don't know if that's the way to go. I don't know if that's how you fix it, especially because it would be a very interesting, expensive choice for this amount of pen as well. But hey, you never know. And just to give you a bit of an overview of what we have Demonic Grip being slightly changed, but then the items that actually have pen now are Pythagoras Piece, Typhoons Fang, Soul Reaver, Shaman's Ring, Warlock Staff, and Staff of Merton. Plus, of course, Obsidian Shard still exists. So you have 7 pen items right here to choose from, 8 if you want to count Demonic Grip, which is a little different, 4 percentage pen. Definitely a different situation from beforehand, but also a big question mark to me, because I think many mages will not look towards building most of these items in most situations. The item that I could see definitely being built now is Soul Reaver. Soul Reaver as the anti-tank item. What I could also see is Warlock Staff, depending on how things work out. We could go into a meta where Warlock Staff is just very highly valued. Shaman's Ring is hard to say depending on what it is. But Typhoons and Pythags are already very specific items. They're already used by lifesteal builds, which are just not very popular at the moment. And Pythags was used more in other ways, but was still very specific in what it did. And Staff of Merlin is also a very niche item that most definitely does not work as effectively for every single mage. So your options here are basically 2 or 3, and then Obsidian Shard on top of that, if you want to reach that cap, and that will only make you reach exactly the cap. If you get Obsidian Shard plus Soul Reaver plus Warlock Staff, then you will exactly reach 40%, and then you get the 50% from Obsidian Shard. But that also, again, implies that you want to build Warlock Staff at the start of the game. And that also means that you're heavily investing into anti-tank in your build through Soul Reaver, through Obsidian Shard. So how the situation for tanks will change drastically depends on what direction these items shift the meta into. And it's going to be very interesting to see them, very interesting to see what the development based on that is. Because these are not even all changes. We have more. We have the flat penetration changes too. This section focuses more on early game power curves. Certain mages and certain builds can allow for huge power spikes early, often catching players off guard and making mages feel unfair to play against. Mage abilities tend to have larger area of effect or longer persist time, which can be exceptionally frustrating to be hit so hard by. The goal of these changes is to force mages to rely on more raw magical power in the early game by restricting access to flat penetration in the early game. Guardians also get much larger damage boosts of flat penetration rather than power, so this change will heavily affect those options as well, which I think unfortunately, by the way, will also affect Guardian junglers, which are already rare as is. So we have the Magus, new passive replacing the old one, and now increasing damage from subsequent hits of the same ability. Also increased magical power. Very, very interesting change. So the item will no longer have its shred. It seems it will still have the flat pen, which is not that much though, 10 I think at the current point. And it'll now instead fully focus on dots because, well, subsequent hits of the same ability deal more damage. That means it will be absolutely core on Anubis. It was before to a reasonable extent, but now you have 2 dots on that guy, 3 dots on that guy, essentially. So yeah, every ability except your CC is just going to deal more damage. But it's also going to be interesting for other guards. Ragin is someone who definitely comes to mind as well, who has multiple hits on his one. he has multiple ticks on his 2, and his ultimate also has multiple hits, which I'm guessing will count as the same ability, at least if you use the same version of it. So there's definitely going to be a lot of things to look at here for specific mages, and I really hope that this is not going to be too strong, because I have a feeling this could easily escalate. It could be like, you have like gods where it's somewhat effective. You have maybe Zeus where it's like, yeah, you have multiple hits of the same ability, but it's not going insane. And then you have the gods where it's a bit more, okay, how strong is this going to be? Like Shang-Kui, who has a dot on his 1 and he has multiple hits on his ultimate. And then you have the gods that just have 3 abilities that have multiple hits. And it's a bit of a question of where does this end? How far does this scale up? And how brutal are those particular mages going to be? So, yeah. Spear of the Magus has always been thought of as the damage over time item. It's especially effective on gods whose abilities tick more than 1 time. As we pivot away from giving a massive magical damage boost to your whole team, we'll focus it toward being a literal dot item. Its new passive will cause enemies to take increased damage if they're hit by multiple instances of damage from the same ability. Now we have, of course, to keep in mind here that beforehand, it in a sense did the same way, or the same thing already. By you apply 1 dot ability and everything else afterwards will do a ton more damage. Now it's the dot itself that does more damage, but to offset that, they may have to make that particular dot scale a little bit more, which then again could lead to complications or not, depending on how exactly they execute it. So we'll see with this one how exactly it'll turn out. A few other key items will be affected by this balanced pass, and in general they will be losing flat penetration and gaining power. Shoes of the Magi removed 10% magical penetration, increased magical power from 55 to 75. I don't know why you would want to build Shoes of the Magi after this. Shoes of Focus has the same power, well, right now, like 55, I think it still has that, and 10% cooldown reduction. And I would say I would 100% want the 10% cooldown reduction. Like, maybe on Mage ADCs. But even on them, I don't know. I feel like that's just going to be a loss. I don't think that the power here can offset the magical pen. We'll see. Voidstone and Tier 2. Increased magical power from 20 to 40. Increased Rework passive to now provide a 10% magical protection reduction. So this is going to be very interesting, because in most situations, this will take off a whole chunk of protection reduction from this item when it comes to squishies. So that's definitely going to have a major effect. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind is that this is an AoE, an AoE percentage protection reduction. So if your allies, your mages, do not want to get up to the percentage pen cap, because we talked about this, they may not want all these items, then you as a support or you as a solo laner can assist that by including Voidstone and still getting this percentage reduction. Now, unfortunately, as it stands, percentage reduction and percentage penetration do not have an ideal interaction. So you're not going to effectively get the exact amount that you want to reach, but it should still be justifiable to pick it up here. And still, it's team-wide. So this is going to be interesting if you have a heavy magical comp and then the enemy team decides to just go heavy into magical defense. And maybe you have an AA mage that is, say, Freya, whatever, doesn't matter. And then you have someone building Voidstone. And then you will have, whatever, I don't know how much Demonic Grip is going to offer, but whatever. If Demonic Grips ends up adding like 30% instead of 36 now, then this would still ramp you up to 40% reduction against the target, and it's easier to apply this way because you already have 10% from the start, which means the Mage ADC will also deal more damage from the start. And then you can have another Mage that maybe has Obsidian Shard and double pops that or Soul Reaver. So there's going to be a lot more effectiveness to counter those tank comps, when there was actually maybe a bit of the opposite of the idea that they had. Again, at the same time, Obsidian Shard alone could do so much beforehand that I can understand that they want to do this shift. There may be some tuning necessary to specific items, because Voidstone While it's gotten worse in some situations, it will have gotten, or it will get better through this in some late game scenarios, I think. Stone of Binding, decreased magical and physical penetration on passive trigger. Well, this one's just rough. Because Stone of Binding is already, it's a situational item. It was considered on supports, but it's not always built. It's a kind of, you know, do you want to go Thieves? Do you want to go Binding? Do you want to go something else? And Binding has its place as an early game item that allows for more aggression than the traditional path. And by reducing the pen, what do you build it for? The defense on the item, the effective health on the item is not as good as other options. And the pen is what sells this. And I don't know what they're going to reduce this down to, but I feel like this might be the end of Stone of Binding. Dynasty Playtown will work to be a more clear hybrid item and have no flat penetration. Also, again, unfortunate. I don't know where Dynasty is going to end up. I always liked Old Dynasty, but I kind of have to see that it has to go with this entire system being overhauled. Let's put it that way. Magical power changes. As the final part of the puzzle, we're adding slightly more power to a series of magical items. Roughly 10 to 15 power per item listed here. This is intended to compensate mages for essentially losing their top 2 items in the game. Mages were performing quite well, so they could survive some nerfs, but the amount of damage from penetration was staggering. This power increase is necessary to keep mages successful through these pivotal changes. Power increases your strength by adding to your damage. Penetration increases your strength by multiplying your output, making it much more potent than power in most situations. For example, Scylla's Crush, while at 400 magical power and 15 penetration, hitting another mage would deal as much as a Scylla with 525 magical power and no penetration. In this scenario, 15 penetration is equivalent to 125 magical power. So, the items that receive increased magical power. Spear of Desolation. Very interesting because Spear of Desolation is not mentioned when it comes to penetration reduction. So if Spear of Desolation stays the same and only gets a power increase of 10 to 15 power, it is gonna be a very interesting item. And I personally already like Spear of Desolation, even if it's not meta. I think it's a very well-rounded item that you can always pick up when you don't need Divine Ruin. And I'm surprised that it's getting power. Rolf Tahuti gets some more power as well. Soul Gem, interesting one because Soul Gem is not really a high power item at the moment. Polynomicon, also an interesting one because it kind of scales with the power as well. Chronos Pendant, also very interesting because lower-ish power has always been Chronos Pendant, like weak point compared to, you know, having high CDR and a relatively high price. Well, maybe we'll see Chronos Pendant as a core item along with pen items. And then Telekine's Ring as well, which is also going to be very interesting, but we have to see what happens to the Mage ADC builds anyways, because there are some changes that we don't really fully see yet. Non-mage items. An obvious question in players' minds right now is, what about physical penetration? This is definitely something we've considered, but in truth, these two damage types have many differences. These two types do not need to have the same design strategies applied to them. I can see that from the angle that, again, physical defense is something that you're more likely to build in a game anyways, because you kind of need it to get through towers. We feel that the current balanced state of physical items are in a much more positive state and less adjustments are required. We are applying a few key lessons from the magical penetration to pass to physical items. There won't be any reworks due to this, but the following items will have both the penetration amounts reduced. This is gonna be Die in Spain, Void Shield and Tier 2, and Executioner. Now, I don't know what to say here, because what you have to keep in mind is that this is literally all the percentage pen they have. I don't know how they're going to be reduced, what amounts, if we're like seeing the same Obsidian Shard level treatment on Titan's Bane, probably not. Titan's Bane already works in the same awkward way as Obsidian Shard does at the moment, and I wish it didn't. I don't know. We're nerfing all the pen items with no offset for that on the physical department. For the mages, the entire meta is just going to change, and we're going to see what direction it goes in. For physical, so far, it seems like they're just getting, just getting some nerfs. That's it. Void Shield is especially heavy, of course, but that's also the most justified one in my eyes, because Void Shield just is very strong. It's all you can say about it. It's so good that it's like, it's run on aggressive physical support, it's run on solos, it's run on junglers. Yeah, Void Shield is never a bad pickup. Executioner is a core item on ADCs, of course, but that's because you need it. But Titan's Bane is already not a core item anymore. We see especially assassins, who should be the primary users of Titan's Bane, skipping Titan's Bane because in many situations it ends up not being worth it. And now this gets its pen reduced again. I don't know what's gonna happen with the other items, but I'm just saying, like, what makes people then even consider Titan's Bane over just brute forcing it with more power and with items like Heartseeker that deal damage to tanks in other ways? I don't fully understand it, because Titan's Bane is already like a relatively low value item if your primary target's like squishies and you just need a secondary damage option for tanks. So I hope that the Hi-Rez has thought this one through and has or will add other changes for physicals. Like they mentioned something above, but that specifically target this penetration change as well, this context as well. Because otherwise, what's Titan's Bane gonna be? These changes will be closely monitored for player feedback and data throughout all stages of the process. Olympians and pro players have already reviewed a lot of this proposal, and we have been working in playtesting with their feedback in mind. We look forward to releasing the full patch notes soon, so we can get even more feedback. There are a few key balance points we'll be open to adjusting throughout PTS and post-launch. Obsidian Shard stats and even the percent penetration cap itself will be open to adjustment if there is a clear improvement to be gained from it. We feel confident that these changes will improve players' experiences across the game, but we can't really ensure that without hearing from all of you. Thank you for your continuing passion for Smite and for always telling us how you feel. Make sure you tune into the Season 7 patch notes on January the 8th at 3 p.m. for more in-depth discussion on these and the rest of the item changes coming next update. See you on the battleground. So yeah, overall very interesting. Again, I'm surprised that in the context of all this, Divine Ruin, Spear of Desolation were kind of, well, only getting buffed. Spear of Desolation specifically. I'm not entirely sure how to feel about all this. The physical part bothers me because they kind of either half disclosed information or didn't fully think this through. The magical part is definitely more interesting, but it's going to be hard for mages to find a really good build path right now that's not forced, because their goal is to not force one path, but right now it still looks like we're going to have a forced path of maybe lifesteal if it can become effective enough. That's around here. And maybe here. And that's only if it's not hard countered by anti-heal too much anyways, which with Divine Ruin still being a popular item, most likely I don't see really changing. Maybe the I am tanky, but I also burst tanks path. And then my mage can use the Staff of Merlin path. And then outside of that, you're still kind of back to Obsidian Shard most of the time. And I feel like that's just what it's going to be, that people just run Obsidian Shard as their primary pan choice anyways, as long as the internal cooldown isn't too long, as long as they can halfway utilize it. But I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work out. We'll have to see. We'll know more in the patch notes when we have the full changes. Anyways, that's it for now. I've talked about this as much as I can without having the full information, and we'll talk more about it once we see the full patch notes. Other than that, I'll be back for the, I think, Bastet changes that are coming tomorrow. Yeah, Bastet and then Joust, I think. So we'll talk about that. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, hit the sub button and hit the bell so that you're notified of these upcoming changes that I'll talk about. DukeSloth, out.